In June of 1963, the NAACP charged that Boston maintained a segregated school system. And in 1961, the Supreme Court had said that de facto segregation was just as much a violation of the 14th Amendment as de jure segregation. Of Boston's 200 schools, 15 had a student population that was more than 90% African American. This is in a city where African Americans constituted about 15% of the population. 35 of Boston's schools were more than 50% black. More importantly, 90% of the 12,000 black students in Boston attended schools that were more than 50% black. More than half, that is about 6,000, attended schools that were 90% black. And if you think about it, about 100,000 or so, 90 to 100,000 students in the Boston public schools, 12,000 are black, and the percentage of those students attending predominantly black schools was staggering. And only about 30 or 40 of the more than 1,000 teachers in the Boston school system were African American, and there were 200 schools, not one black principal. This is a staggering indication of something. The school committee insists these are simply the result of neighborhood housing patterns and not of conscious actions on the part of the school committee. The NAACP and Boston's black community are very skeptical about this claim. In the fall elections in 1963, there's a committee that hopes to improve the Boston schools, and they've recruited some very good candidates to run, including Mel King, and that entire slate of reformers is voted down, and in fact, Louise Day Hicks tops the ticket. She outpolls the mayor by about 20,000 votes, and she sees this as a vindication of her position on de facto segregation. Says that the people of Boston have given their answer to the de facto segregation question. Her re-election makes her a national figure. Pundits in Washington say that her victory is going to haunt President Kennedy, who had given a speech on civil rights as an important issue, and now you have Kennedy's hometown, or voters in his hometown, vindicating Louise Day Hicks and her position that de facto segregation does not exist. The day after her victory, George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, was speaking at Smith College in western Massachusetts, and he pointed out that in Alabama there were 10,000 black teachers and hundreds of black principals, but Boston only had 40 black teachers and no principals. He's not signaling his support for integration, but pointing out that white Northerners were somewhat hypocritical in pointing to Alabama as a bastion of opposition to racial integration. So you have a developing polarization in Boston over the issues of schools and segregation. In February of 1964, there's another one-day boycott of the Boston public schools, and the black community organizes freedom schools, but fewer than 10% of students stay out of school on that day. More importantly, there is a move in the legislature to pass or to adopt a racial imbalance law that will outlaw the kind of racial imbalance you see in Boston. And in April of 1960, there's a polarization of the city, and for better or worse, Mrs. Hicks becomes a focal point for either what is right with neighborhood schools or what is wrong with Boston, depending on your point of view. In April of 1965, Martin Luther King visits Boston. Mrs. Hicks invites him to address the school committee and also to hear what the committee plans to do to address the overcrowding in the schools and to improve the schools in black neighborhoods, but plans to have King meet with the school committee fall through. And you have King beginning his march to Boston Common from the steps of the Boardman School in Roxbury, one of the overcrowded, antiquated schools in Boston's black community, looking at this as an unjustifiable denial of the rights of African American children to an equal education. In the fall of 1965, black parents organized what they call Operation Exodus taking advantage of the school's policy of allowing students to enroll in any school in the system where there are open seats. Of course, the school committee won't reveal where the open seats are, so the parents have to do a great deal of research and digging and actually persistent asking and going into schools to find open seats in classrooms. But beginning in the fall of 1965, Operation Exodus takes children from overcrowded schools in Roxbury and North Dorchester to open seats in other parts of the city. The following year, another privately funded program, METCO, will bring students, African American students, from schools in the black community to suburban communities outside the city. As one of the problems for Boston in tackling the issue of racial segregation, in addition to perhaps the obstinacy of the school committee, is the fact that Boston represents only a fraction of the greater population of the metropolitan area. There are about 600,000 people in Boston, 3 million people in the metropolitan area, and Boston's suburbs are overwhelmingly white. So this is an issue, and Mrs. Hicks will argue that supporters of racial integration, aside from people in the black community, are unaffected proponents in the racial isolation of the suburbs. And will say that if people in Brookline and other communities really want to solve the problems of the inner city, what they should do is build more affordable housing in Brookline, Newton, Wellesley, other communities. In 1965, the legislature passes the Racial Imbalance Act, which makes it illegal for a school system to maintain schools that have more than a 50% minority enrollment. A rather complicated idea to understand. There are about 55 schools in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that by this definition are racially imbalanced. 45 of them are in Boston. And at the same time as we have the Racial Imbalance Act being passed, we have a growing African American population in Boston, in the city of Boston, and we also have a policy on the part of some Boston banks to encourage home ownership by African Americans. The Boston Bank Urban Renewal Group, as a way of helping African Americans achieve home ownership, draw a blue line around Roxbury, Mattapan, and part of Dorchester, and within that line they will loan money to African Americans who want to buy homes. They will not loan money to others who want to buy or improve homes there. At this time, there is a black community living in this area, but there also are about 70,000 Jews and Irish and others. It's a racially mixed area. In fact, Blue Hill Avenue was the center of Boston's Jewish community. By 1971, that is 10 years after, there only are about 1,500 Jews left in this area, as Roxbury, Mattapan, and North Dorchester have become overwhelmingly African American. That is, in the interest of creating opportunities for black home ownership, the Boston Bank's Urban Renewal Group had in effect created a ghetto. So you have the best of intentions at work here on the parts of the banks, and you also have the school committee refusing to acknowledge the problems of racial imbalance in the schools, and you see Boston lurching toward a greater crisis over this issue.